What is the darkest family secret you could never tell anyone? Story 1. My last name shouldn't even be my last name. My great-grandfather took it from a tombstone while on the run from the law. My great-grandmother later discovered she wasn't legally married after 30 years and 5 sons. She ended up in a mental institution in New Orleans and was given a lobotomy because of it. She raised me until her death, and she was an amazing woman who didn't deserve any of it. She was from the South, studied medicine, but wasn't allowed to practice, so she ended up teaching black children to read despite her father, who was in the KKK. She was one of the first women in Georgia to vote and to have a driver's license. An all-around incredible woman that I was lucky to be around. She was born in 1899. R.I.P. Irene. Story 2. I'm half Japanese and half American. My Japanese grandpa fought against the Chinese in WW2, though he was forced into service despite how much he didn't want to. He saw minimal fighting and wasn't involved in any of the Japanese atrocities. Reddit often forgets that not all Japanese soldiers back then were barbaric. He only ever told 2 short stories about his time in the war. When Japan was leaving Shanghai near the end of the war, my grandpa lost a coin toss with his friends for the first boat out. He sat on the docks and watched as the boat carrying all his friends and half his company was blown up by Allied bombers. His last military mission, after Hiroshima was bombed, he was ordered to search for survivors. He only said, "We were told to find survivors. We only found ash." After the war, he became a diplomat for Japan from 1950 to 1998, strongly advocating for peace and taking an anti-war stance. He never told anyone about his military service except my grandma. I only found out about his past when he was nearing the end of his life. I wouldn't really call this dark, more like, oh right, I technically have family who fought against the good guys in WW2. This is a weird feeling. Story 3. No one knows where my uncle actually came from. My grandfather was a very high-ranking policeman, but also a raging asshole. My nana sadly had a stillborn baby, and my very Catholic grandfather was a complete jerk about her grief. He refused to acknowledge the baby as having any right to be buried in the family cemetery since it wasn't baptized. Nana suffered enormously, and Granddad got sick of it. One day he came home with a newborn, told Nana they had adopted him, and said she could stop crying now. And that newborn became my uncle. He came with 0 paperwork, no birth certificate, no adoption papers, nothing. Our best guess is that he was the baby of an incarcerated woman, but since both grandparents have passed away, we'll never know for sure. Personally, I don't care about the legacy of an angry and abusive man, but the rest of the family keeps it under tight wraps, so his police service record won't be tarnished by the fact that we're pretty sure he stole a baby. Story 4. My stepmom was abusive. She's a social climber, obsessed with appearances. I was raised with the rule that what happens behind closed doors stays behind closed doors. I'm 42 now, with a toddler of my own, and I can't understand how anyone could treat a child the way she treated me. I'm at the point where I'm ready to confront my dad, who never really stood up to her. I'm tired of keeping this secret and being the family's subtle punching bag. And yes, I mean literally kicking. It just sounds better to say punching. Everything was calculated and underhanded when other people were around, but behind closed doors it was a different story. She's an extreme narcissist and, I'm convinced, either a psychopath or sociopath. She constantly twisted everything to make herself the victim. She wasn't even truly religious. She was social climber religious. If I coughed in church, she'd drag me home and lecture me for hours about being the devil. She'd dig her sharp nails into my chest, grab my chin and bang my head against the stone fireplace, force me to stand in one spot for hours while she lectured me. And I wasn't allowed to cross my arms because it was defensive. If I was in the middle of changing, too bad. I had to stand there naked. Even when I was just developing and self-conscious, sometimes in front of my younger step-siblings. When I was trying to learn long division in 4th grade, she screamed that I was stupid and banged my head on the counter. She told me my mom fought harder to keep the microwave than to keep me. She'd keep me home from school as punishment for things I didn't do, yell at me all day, and confine me to my room. I was terrified of everything. I didn't want to miss school, but kids sense fear, and I didn't feel safe there either. I felt hunted everywhere I went. At the very least, she taught me the kind of person I never want to be. It doesn't even feel like a cycle. I'm nothing like her. I moved across the country after high school and built a wonderful family of my own. Now, I just want to know where to put my time and energy and who's really on my side. It's all going to come out soon. I'm planning to have a talk with my dad on my next visit back. I need some sense of freedom and relief. Story 5. My great-uncle Donald killed his ex-wife so he wouldn't have to pay child support or alimony. My great-grandma covered for him when the cops came to question him, saying he'd been with her all night. Since it was a small town and back in the day, they didn't really push too hard. My grandpa said he was a kid when it happened and remembered overhearing it while playing in the living room, wondering why his mom was lying. Donald is still alive today. After killing his ex-wife, he abandoned his kid by dropping him off at his grandmother's house and never coming back. Later, when he was around 50, he slept with a 16-year-old girl because her mother allowed it, hoping he would sell her his horse ranch at a discounted price. When he didn't, she reported him to the cops. He got arrested, and she still managed to get the ranch in the end. Messed up how she basically pimped out her underage daughter, but that's what happened. He didn't serve much time for that, and now he's out again, pulling scams to get by. Story 6. On my mom's side, my grandfather was adopted because his mother was Irish Catholic and pregnant out of wedlock. Not sure of all the details, but his father was a prominent man in their state and had a daughter with his wife just shortly before. The family that adopted my grandfather had a murder-suicide in their history back in 1906, so, yeah, no wonder he was angry about being given up. His adoptive parents were violent, alcoholic, enabling Holocaust deniers. My great-grandfather on the other side was a child predator, and everyone knew, but since that's what his dad had done, they acted like it wasn't wrong. My great-grandmother covered for him. My granddad did beat him up on the front lawn when my grandmother graduated college, so at least there was that. On my dad's side, my minister grandfather had a long affair with the church secretary and eventually divorced my grandmother for her. I haven't seen that side of the family since I was 9, because my dad has a violent temper, so who knows what else went on. And let's not even get into my cousin trying to sleep with me when we were teenagers. Or my mom marrying a convicted predator once without realizing it. Or someone further back in the family line being pardoned by the governor of Kentucky for Ku Kluxing. Throw in substance abuse, mental illness, violence, estrangement, you name it. Story 7. My cousin is a serial predator, and my entire family protects him. He assaulted me when I was a child, and when I tried to tell my adoptive mother, who's biologically my aunt, she called me a liar and let him keep living with us instead of sending him back to his own parents. When I was 19, I found out he had been doing the same thing to my other cousins and to multiple little girls who were friends with his niece. 2 of them even made reports. I went to the police to try to file my own report because I felt guilty, like if I had told a teacher back then, maybe he wouldn't have had more victims. But I wasn't taken seriously, and neither were those girls, so he's still free. He even has 2 daughters and another child on the way. I was completely ostracized from my family for speaking up. His mom called me a lying whore and said I was just talking about my fantasies. Now, every day, I just wish there were some way for real justice to be served, because if there were no consequences, he wouldn't be alive. Story 8. It's not really a secret anymore, but no one talks about it except me, my mom, my stepdad, my aunt, my cousins, and my uncle. My grandparents are part of the reason why my narcissistic, abusive, alcoholic father turned out the way he did. My grandfather screamed at him, cursed at him, tied him to a chair, and force-fed him throughout his childhood. My grandmother, who is now my father's biggest enabler, just sat there and did nothing. She even made excuses for my grandfather while the abuse was happening, defending him as it went on. Now she's frighteningly deep in denial, both about my grandfather abusing my dad and about my dad abusing and abandoning me. She coddles him, makes excuses for him, defends him, tends to him, spoils him, enables him, and infantilizes him to make up for ignoring, dismissing, and neglecting him as a child. She's now doing to me exactly what she once did to him. We're all done with it. We're just completely and utterly disgusted. Story 9. My grandfather immigrated to the country I live in now from Austria when he was just a preteen. He was born in 1945, at the very end of World War II, but during a time when Nazi influence was still present. He shared so many stories from that era. In our family, it's always been said that his father, a soldier in the war, was injured by shrapnel in his lungs, which made it hard for him to breathe. I believed that story growing up, but now I'm not so sure there wasn't more to it. We were also told the government actually paid for my grandfather's family to relocate and even gave his father a list of countries to choose from. He picked the one he'd never heard of, the furthest away. It doesn't really make sense why they would offer him that option if he was just an ordinary man. He never returned, either. My mom even found multiple passports belonging to him. What's even stranger is that my grandfather insisted, right up until his dying day, that this man wasn't his real father. He said his biological father had been shot by soldiers when they tried to flee the country, and his mother later met the man who raised him. It's such a wild family story that still leaves me wondering if my great-grandfather was actually escaping Nazi trials after World War II. Sadly, they're all gone now, and I'll never know the full truth. Story 10. Back in the early 1960s, G was married to her abusive high school sweetheart, D, with whom she already had 4 children. At the time, she was very pregnant. The 2 eldest children were old enough to fully understand that their mom was expecting another baby. One day, D came home drunk and furious for no reason. Without provocation, he brutally beat G almost to death and then left the house with no remorse. Somehow, G managed to crawl to the front door, leaving a trail of blood, and screamed for a neighbor to call 911. She spent a long time in the hospital while her mother took care of the children. The kids were never told the truth about what had happened. The 2 youngest were too little to understand, but the 2 eldest were explicitly told not to ask questions. D was never arrested or charged. G was terrified of him, and despite everything, she was still so in love with him that she swept it all under the rug. When she finally returned home, the older children couldn't help but notice that she was no longer pregnant and that there was no baby. But, as it was back then, you didn't question your parents when they told you not to. Shockingly, G and D went on to have 2 more children before G finally found the strength to divorce him and kick him out for good. No one in the family ever talked about the extent of what had happened. Everyone just knew that D was abusive, but only G, D, and G's mother knew the full truth, and they kept it hidden for more than 40 years. G eventually confessed to my cousin, perhaps to trauma bond over the abuse they endured in their own childhood. My cousin shared it with me one day during a conversation about family drama. I knew things were dark, but I wasn't expecting that. D had committed attempted murder and the murder of an unborn child, and he got away with it. Then, for whatever twisted reason, G stayed and had 2 more kids with him. By the time I was born, D was already out of the picture. At his funeral, I watched his children cry and share good memories of him. To me, he was just G's first husband and the father of 6, someone I wouldn't even recognize if I passed him on the street. I had no idea how evil he truly was. Now, only one person is still alive who would remember those events, the eldest child of G and D, and they've never spoken about it. Story 11. My great-uncle was a pharmacist on Grand Avenue in St. Paul, Minnesota during the 1930s. Quick history lesson. At that time, the St. Paul Police Department was notoriously corrupt, and the city was a safe haven for gangsters. I even lived in one of the apartment buildings where John Dillinger stayed during Prohibition. Anyway, my uncle was known in the area for helping people who were struggling. Instead of asking for money for medicine or treatments, he'd accept chickens, vegetables, a few apples, sometimes nothing at all. My grandma, his sister, said it drove my great-aunt crazy because she managed the business ledgers, and they weren't bringing in much cash. Yet somehow, they were always comfortable. According to my grandma, my great-uncle told his wife, "What's there to worry about? The bills are paid. We have food. We have clothes. We have heat. Everything's taken care of." Yeah, turns out, he was a bootlegger. Only my grandma knew, and he was connected with some pretty big names. As far as I know, I'm the only other person who knows the full story. My grandma told me when I was younger, after I came home from a class field trip where we saw a play about the Carper Barker kidnapping of William Ham Jr. of Ham's Beer. That trip inspired me to buy the book Murder in Minnesota, and when my grandma saw me reading it, she opened up about my great-uncle possibly working with the likes of Dillinger, Capone, Karpus, and Ma Barker and her sons. Story 12. A few years ago, while cleaning, I came across my mom's old diary and learned something that shocked me. She first met my dad when she was 12, and he was 30, and at the time, he was dating my grandma. There weren't many details about that relationship between my dad and my mom's mom, but 7 years later, When my mom was 19, I was born. A year after that, she and my dad got married. Back in elementary school, there was a girl whose parents were from the same village as my mom. She told everyone that my grandma was actually my biological mother. I never really cared or paid attention to it then, but now, as an adult, after reading my mom's diary, some things make sense. Both my dad and my grandma have passed away, and my relationship with my mom has never been great, so I know I'll never find out the truth from her. But when I look back on all the family drama over the years, and the way my mom treated me so differently compared to my brother, who was born 2 years after me, once she and my dad were married, it makes me wonder. She raised me with this strange, consider me your best friend, not your mother attitude, and I can't help but question everything. Story 13. My family presents itself as an open-minded Christian family on the outside, but behind closed doors they are extremely homophobic, sexist, violent, manipulative, just bad people in general. They act like they're the cool Christians who listen to everyone and respect all beliefs, but in reality, they're like lions waiting for the right moment to hunt someone down and drag them to church. They don't care about people unless it's to manipulate them. My father, who is also classist, racist, anti-Semitic, and sexist, actually brags about being proudly homophobic. He said that if a gay person even accidentally bumped into him on the street, he would kill them. One of my uncles currently rents an apartment to a lesbian couple. Good people who pay on time and keep the place spotless, but he's looking for a way to throw them out without getting sued. He even said that once he kicks them out, he plans to exorcise the apartment. My stepfather is a head nurse at a psychiatric hospital and also a professional psychologist. He feels frustrated that he can't perform exorcisms on gay patients who come in for psychiatric care. On top of all this, every marriage in my family is toxic. Abuse goes both ways, men to women and mothers to children. I've been abused in many ways myself, to the point where nobody knows I'm dependent on antidepressants just to cope. Still, I have to pretend everything is fine. The truth is I'm exhausted and terrified of them. If I came out of the closet, they might kill me or send me to conversion therapy. My father has even pressured me to get pregnant by any random man, just to keep me in line. I haven't been able to escape this house because of financial reasons. I can't tell anyone, because the circle around my family is just as bad or worse. And if I told someone outside that circle, I could end up getting beaten. Story 14. My great-grandparents divorced at a time when divorce was almost unheard of. I don't know the exact reason, but I do know that as an adult, my mom began to recover memories of her grandfather sexually abusing her. She confronted her mother about it, thinking my grandmother might have known, or maybe even been abused herself. I only know this because I overheard my mom talking about it when I was a teenager. I never asked her about it, and neither she nor anyone else has ever brought it up again. The divorce happened long before my mom was even born, but I can't help but think abuse may have played a role. Back then, in such a small, conservative town, something truly terrible would have had to happen to justify divorce. Another family secret, though not so untouchable now, is that my grandparents got married when my grandma was 16 because she was pregnant with my mom. I never knew this until my grandmother passed away 4 years ago. My mom never mentioned it. She's very set in her generational mindset, even more than most, and I'm sure it was difficult for her growing up in such a small town. Still, teen pregnancy isn't considered so taboo anymore that it has to be hidden, and yet she never spoke of it. I only found out when my aunt mentioned it while we were meeting with the pastor for my grandma's funeral service. Looking back, the real tragedy wasn't the pregnancy, it was the forced marriage at such a young age. I wish I'd known earlier, because a conversation my grandmother once tried to have with me when I was a teenager suddenly makes sense now. At the time, I didn't understand what she was trying to tell me because I didn't have the context. She probably assumed I already knew, but I didn't. Story 15. My great-grandmother and my grandmother didn't speak to each other. When I was a child, they couldn't even be in the same room. At family gatherings like birthdays, one would show up in the afternoon and the other would come for dinner. My parents never told me exactly why, just vague things about conflicts over how my grandma raised my aunt. Nothing specific. But on the day my great-grandmother died, my dad and I went for a walk with our dog and talked about family history. That's when I learned the truth. It had nothing to do with my aunt. The real reason was that my grandma's stepdad had been sexually abusing her, and my great-grandmother allowed it to happen. That same day, I also found out that my dad has an older brother, not related to the abuse, who was given up for adoption in the early 1960s because my grandparents weren't married at the time, and back then, having a child out of wedlock was unacceptable. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.